Sometimes, the quietest moments in life hide the most explosive storms. A simple boarding pass, a seat number, a glance from someone in uniform, things that appear ordinary can ignite a fire no one expects. Behind calm eyes, there are people who hold power strong enough to shake entire industries. What looked like just another flight on just another evening would become the airline's darkest hour, because one woman was underestimated and her husband was the wrong man to cross. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today and what time you're currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. Camille Johnson stood tall in the bustling terminal of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. She wore a sharp navy blue suit, her hair pinned neatly, and a leather carry-on tucked under her arm. At 42, she was one of the most respected business leaders in the country, a black woman who had built her tech company from the ground up. Her company, Airline Systems, provided cloud-based infrastructure to Fortune 500 firms and government agencies. She was used to moving through airports with quiet confidence, blending her sense of class with an air of discipline. This trip wasn't for business, though. It was supposed to be simple, a weekend getaway with her husband, Anthony. He was already waiting for her at their destination in New York. Camille had taken a later flight after finishing an investor meeting. She was tired, but excited to finally relax with him. Her boarding pass said first class, C2A. She had earned it, not just with money, but with years of sleepless nights building her empire. The privilege of stretching her legs and sipping champagne at 30,000 feet was a small reward for what she had fought for. When the gate agent called for first-class passengers, Camille stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she presented her pass. The agent smiled politely, scanned it, and waved her through without a word. As Camille entered the aircraft, the atmosphere shifted. A blonde flight hostess, mid-30s, wearing the crisp navy uniform of the airline, looked up. Her name tag read Kelly. Kelly's smile froze when she saw Camille. Her eyes darted down to the boarding pass and then back up again. She took a step forward, blocking Camille's way with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am," Kelly said, her voice sugar-coated but sharp underneath. "This is the first-class cabin. Economy boarding is in the back." Camille paused, blinking once. "I know. My seat is 2A." She handed over the pass again. Kelly glanced at it, her lips pressing thin. "I think there's been a mistake. This section is reserved." Camille's tone cooled. "It's not a mistake. Please let me through." Passengers behind her began shifting, curious at the holdup. A man in a suit coughed impatiently. The hostess's voice rose slightly, enough for others to hear. "Ma'am, I said this section is for first-class ticket holders only." A ripple of discomfort passed through the small crowd. Camille could feel the stares, some sympathetic, others judgmental. She had been here before, in boardrooms where she was the only black woman, in meetings where her words were questioned until a man repeated them. But this was different. Camille squared her shoulders. "Check again. My name is Camille Johnson. That's my seat." Kelly hesitated, eyes flicking to Camille's polished nails, her designer bag, her flawless posture. But something ugly simmered behind her professional mask. She handed the pass back with a stiff hand. "You'll need to wait here until I verify with the captain." The words were unnecessary. Camille had already been scanned through the gate. Still, Kelly stepped away, leaving her standing awkwardly in the narrow aisle. Murmurs grew. The man behind her whispered, "Unbelievable," while a woman in coach craned her neck to see. Camille's chest tightened, but she forced her face into calm indifference. She wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Minutes passed. Kelly returned with a smirk. "There's an open seat in economy. I'll reassign you there for now until this gets sorted." Camille's jaw clenched. "I paid for first class. I'm not moving." Kelly leaned closer, her tone dropping. "Look, don't make this harder. Some sections are better suited for certain passengers. Economy will be more comfortable for you." The words hung in the air like poison. Camille's blood ran cold. It wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't about a mistake. It was about her skin, her presence, her very existence in that premium space. A passenger gasped audibly. Someone muttered, "That's messed up," but no one intervened. Camille swallowed hard. Her voice was steady, though her heart thundered. "You'll regret this." Kelly's smile faltered for the first time. Camille allowed herself to be guided backward, her dignity intact, but her fury simmering. She dropped into a cramped middle seat in economy, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her eyes unblinking. Around her, whispers buzzed like gnats. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Camille pulled out her phone. She typed a message quickly. "Boarded. Something happened. Need to talk when I land." She hit send. Her husband's reply came almost instantly. "What happened?" Camille hesitated. She didn't want to unleash her anger through text. She needed to see him, to let him feel the weight of what had just happened. She only wrote, "Not here. We'll explain soon." Her husband's final message before takeoff was short, chilling in its simplicity. "Understood." I'll be waiting. The engines roared, and the plane lifted into the night sky. Camille closed her eyes, but sleep never came. The humiliation burned hotter with every mile traveled, and a storm was already forming, one that the airline had no idea was coming. The plane touched down at JFK with a jolt. Passengers sighed in relief, phones buzzed back to life, and the cabin filled with the rustle of bags being yanked from overhead bins. Camille sat motionless, her seatbelt still fastened. She waited until the aisle cleared, her gaze fixed on the floor, jaw tight enough to ache. She hated that she had let herself be pushed into that seat. Every fiber of her body screamed against the humiliation, but she had chosen calm over chaos. Not because she was weak, because she was calculating. She knew herself well enough to understand that storms could be delayed but never avoided. When she finally stood and walked off the plane, she felt the stares again. Some avoided her eyes, ashamed of their silence. Others carried curiosity, wondering who she was and why her dignity seemed intact despite the open insult. In the terminal, Camille spotted Anthony immediately. He stood tall in a dark tailored coat, his presence commanding. Broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He looked more like a general than a businessman. Anthony Johnson wasn't just her husband. He was a man who had built his empire on precision and power. He saw her, his eyes narrowing. She expected his arms to open wide, but instead he stopped still, reading her face like a classified document. Camille walked into his steady gaze, and without a word, he took her carry-on from her hand. "Talk," he said simply, his voice low and even. Camille drew a slow breath. "Not here. Let's get to the car." The black SUV waiting outside purred as the driver held the door open. They slid inside, the tinted glass shutting out the chaos of the city. Only then did Camille's composure crack, her voice trembling with fury she had kept locked away. She stopped me at the cabin door. The hostess, so I didn't belong in first class. She made me stand there while people stared. Then she told me I'd be more comfortable in economy. Anthony's jaw tightened, the muscle twitching at his temple. What was her name? Kelly. Camille spat, her voice sharp as glass. Anthony leaned back, his hands steepled together. His silence was heavier than any curse. Camille knew that silence. It was the sound of calculations, of pieces moving into place inside his mind. "Do you have her full name?" he asked finally. "No, just the badge." "Kelly. Good enough. I'll get the rest." The driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, but kept his eyes on the road. Camille continued, her voice rising with emotion now that she was safe in the cocoon of the car. "I've worked my whole life to stand where I do. Every step, every deal, every sacrifice. And she tried to shrink me down to nothing in front of everyone. Like I was out of place, like I didn't belong." Anthony reached over and took her hand firmly. "You belong everywhere. And no one strips you of that. Not even for 1 hour." Camille felt the burn behind her eyes but blinked it away. She hated crying, especially in moments like this. Her anger was too sharp to be softened by tears. Anthony pulled out his phone. His voice turned steel-cold as he spoke into it. "Give me the CEO of Trans-Sky Airlines. Tonight." There was a pause on the other end. Camille could hear the nervous tone of the assistant stammering through the speaker. Anthony cut him off. "I don't care what time it is. Wake him. This is not a request." He hung up, his expression unreadable. Camille studied him. She knew Anthony's power ran deep. He wasn't just wealthy. He had influence. He owned shares in companies that owned shares in airlines, in tech, in industries that touched everything from finance to fuel. But what made him dangerous wasn't the money, it was his reach. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" Camille asked softly. Anthony turned to her. "Would you?" She shook her head slowly. "No. I want her to understand what she did. I want the world to understand." Anthony gave a single nod. "Then that's exactly what will happen." The SUV pulled into their private townhouse in Manhattan. Security men in dark suits stood discreetly by the entrance. Inside, the house smelled of cedarwood and fresh linen. Camille kicked off her heels and sank into the sofa, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Anthony stood near the window, city lights reflecting off his face. He was silent again, his phone in hand. Minutes later, it buzzed. Anthony answered immediately. "You have him." There was a muffled voice on the line. Anthony's response was curt. "Patch him through." A moment later, Anthony's voice sharpened with authority. "David, this is Anthony Johnson." "Yes, I know what time it is. One of your employees humiliated my wife tonight on flight 419 from Atlanta. A hostess named Kelly. She denied her first-class seat and forced her into economy." "Yes, you heard me right." Camille watched him, her chest tight. His tone was even, but underneath it was a storm waiting to break. "I don't care about apologies," Anthony continued. "I want action. By tomorrow morning, I expect to know what your airline intends to do about this. And understand me well, David, your response will determine the future of Trans-Sky Airlines." He ended the call without waiting for a reply. The silence afterward was louder than the city outside. Camille leaned forward. "Anthony, what are you planning?" He met her eyes. Nothing rash. Not yet. But they crossed a line tonight. And when people cross lines with me, they learn never to do it again. Camille shivered, not from fear of him, but from the certainty in his voice. She had built her empire through resilience. Anthony had built his through power, and when provoked, his power was absolute. Upstairs, the night stretched long. Camille lay awake beside her husband, staring at the ceiling. She replayed every second on that plane, every whispered comment, every look of pity or disdain. Her humiliation had turned into something else now. Anticipation. Whatever storm Anthony was preparing, she wanted to see it. She wanted justice. But she also knew one thing. When Anthony said the airline would feel it, he meant more than a complaint or a press release. He meant something bigger. Something final. The morning sun spilled over Manhattan, painting the streets gold, but inside the Johnson townhouse the air was tense and heavy. Camille sat at the breakfast table with a cup of untouched coffee. The steam curled upward, but she hardly noticed. Her mind kept replaying the scene on the plane, every detail cutting into her pride like a blade. Anthony entered the room, already dressed in a crisp black suit. He had been awake since before dawn, making calls, moving quietly but decisively. Camille studied him, wondering what strings he was pulling, what doors he was about to kick down. "Eat something," he said, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs toward her. His voice was steady, almost casual, but his eyes betrayed a storm. "I'm not hungry," she murmured. Anthony sat across from her, leaning forward. "You need your strength. Trust me, Camille, this isn't over. Not even close." Camille finally met his gaze. "What exactly are you planning? Last night you called the CEO. What did he say?" Anthony's lips curved into something between a smirk and a scowl. "He said he would look into it, that he'd get back to me today. Typical corporate nonsense. They think they can bury this. Pretend it's nothing. That's their first mistake." Camille folded her hands tightly. "Anthony, I don't want this to look like revenge. I just want fairness. I want her, Kelly, to understand that what she did was wrong." Anthony shook his head. "Camille, people like her don't learn through conversations or lectures. They only learn when the world shakes beneath their feet. And that's exactly what I'm going to make happen." Before Camille could respond, Anthony's phone buzzed. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. A single word appeared on his face. "Focus." "It's him," Anthony said. He answered briskly. "David, you have news." Camille leaned in, listening. She couldn't hear the other man, but she could read the sharp changes in Anthony's expression. First annoyance, then disbelief, and finally cold fury. "You're telling me," Anthony said slowly, "that your hostess filed a report against my wife? Claimed she was the problem? That Camille was disruptive?" Camille's mouth dropped open. "What?" she whispered. Anthony's voice cut like a blade through the air. "David, listen carefully. My wife was humiliated publicly, denied her rightful seat, and now your employee has the audacity to flip the story? Do you realize how close you are to disaster?" There was a pause. Then Anthony ended the call with a sharp motion, slamming the phone on the table. "They're covering for her," he said through gritted teeth. "They think if they paint you as the problem, it'll disappear." Camille stood, her hands trembling with outrage. "She insulted me in front of everyone. She told me I didn't belong. And now they're calling me disruptive." Anthony rose too, towering over the table. "Let them dig their hole deeper. Every word they speak against you is another nail in their coffin." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down. Just then, Camille's phone buzzed. A message from her executive assistant flashed across the screen. "News outlet calling, asking if it's true you caused a disturbance on a flight last night." "Shall I respond?" Camille felt her stomach twist. "It's already out," she said softly. "They leaked it." Anthony's jaw tightened. "Then we play it our way." He picked up his phone again, scrolling to another number. "Give me Marcus," he said into the receiver. Minutes later, a voice came on speaker. "Anthony, it's early. What's going on?" "Marcus," Anthony said evenly. "You still run PR for TransSky's biggest competitor, right?" A chuckle came through the line. "I do." "What?" Anthony's eyes flicked to Camille. "I have a story for you. A very big one. But I want to handle it carefully. The truth. No spin." Marcus's tone sharpened. "Tell me." Anthony didn't hesitate. He laid it out. How Camille, a respected CEO, had been blocked from her rightful seat, humiliated, forced into economy, and then smeared with a false report. Marcus didn't interrupt once. When Anthony finished, the silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, Marcus said, "Send me the details. This will explode once it hits the press." Camille's heart raced. She wasn't used to being at the center of scandal. She had always kept her reputation clean, professional, untouchable. Now, the idea of her name splashed across headlines both terrified and fueled her. After the call ended, Anthony turned to her. "You don't have to say a word. Let me handle the noise." Camille shook her head. "No, if my name is already in it, then I'll speak. I won't hide. I'll tell exactly what happened. People need to hear it from me." Anthony studied her, then nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it together." Hours later, Camille found herself sitting in a sleek midtown office, cameras pointed at her, lights hot on her skin. Marcus had arranged a private interview with one of the nation's top journalists. Camille Johnson, the reporter began. You're the CEO of Orion Systems, a company valued in the billions. Why would an airline hostess target you this way? Camille took a breath, her voice calm but firm. Because sometimes money, status, and power don't protect you from the simplest and ugliest form of bias. She didn't see my title. She didn't see my accomplishments. She saw my skin. She assumed I didn't belong. The reporter leaned forward. And when you resisted, she forced me into a different seat, in front of everyone. I chose not to argue further because I believed dignity was more powerful than a scene. But then the airline twisted the story, claiming I was disruptive. That's why I'm speaking out now. The words echoed, sharp and clear. For the first time since the incident, Camille felt control returning to her. Her truth was now out in the open. That evening, the story broke nationwide. Headlines blared. Black female CEO claims racial discrimination by airline hostess, and trans guy faces backlash after CEO humiliated on flight. The reaction was instant. Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags trended. People shared their own stories of discrimination in travel, amplifying the firestorm. Camille watched it all unfold on her phone, the screen lighting up with mentions and tags. It was overwhelming, but beneath it, she felt a surge of vindication. She had been silenced on that plane, but now her voice carried everywhere. Anthony stood behind her, hands on her shoulders. This is just the beginning, he murmured. And though Camille didn't know what he meant by that, she could feel it. Something bigger was moving, something unstoppable, and the airline had no idea how close it was to collapse. By the following morning, the city felt different. Camille sat by the large bay window in the townhouse living room, scrolling through her phone. Notifications flashed nonstop, thousands of comments, shares, and retweets. Overnight, the story had grown like wildfire. Across the country, morning shows played clips of Camille's interview. Anchors debated whether the incident was part of a larger pattern of discrimination in travel. Passengers from all backgrounds chimed in, sharing stories about unfair treatment on flights. The airline, TransSky, was at the center of a storm it hadn't anticipated. Anthony walked in with a tablet in hand, his face unreadable. He sat on a coffee table in front of her. They've issued a statement, he said. Camille picked up the tablet. The words made her chest tighten. TransSky Airlines regrets any misunderstanding involving passenger Camille Johnson. We are reviewing the incident and will release further information once internal investigations are complete. We take all passenger concerns seriously. Camille read it twice. Misunderstanding, she whispered, her voice trembling. They're still calling it a misunderstanding? Anthony sat down across from her, his eyes dark with anger. That's not an apology. That's an insult. They're stalling, hoping it fades away. Camille slammed the tablet shut. It won't fade. Not this time. Just then, her phone buzzed again. Her assistant, Lila, was calling. Camille answered. Camille, you're not going to like this. Lila's voice was urgent. A leaked memo from TransSky just surfaced. It says their hostess, Kelly, reported that you were aggressive, that you refused instructions, and that she had to reassign you for the safety of the flight. Camille froze. Safety? She's claiming I was a threat. Yes, Lila said. It's everywhere now. Some outlets are running with it. They're painting you as entitled, using your position to play the victim. Anthony leaned forward, his hand motioning for the phone. Camille switched to the speaker. Lila, Anthony said calmly, save every copy of that memo. Every article that cites it. We'll need evidence later. And reach out to legal today. Yes, sir, Lila replied quickly. After the call ended, Camille buried her face in her hands. Anthony, they're trying to destroy me. Everything I've worked for, my reputation, my company, it's all on the line. Anthony reached across the table, lifting her chin gently, so she looked at him. Listen to me. They don't understand who they're dealing with. They think this is about saving their image. But they've just declared war. And Camille, I don't lose wars. His certainty steadied her trembling. She drew a deep breath. Then what's the next step? Anthony stood and paced the room, his mind racing. We go bigger. They want to smear you? Fine. We show the world who you really are. Not just a CEO, not just a businesswoman, but someone who built everything with her own hands. People need to see the truth, and once they do, this airline won't have a leg to stand on. That afternoon, Camille agreed to appear on a national primetime talk show. The network sent a car, and cameras followed her from the townhouse to the studio. Crowds had gathered outside, some holding signs of support. We stand with Camille. Others shouted questions. Microphones shoved in her direction. Inside the studio, the host welcomed her warmly. The lights were brighter than the interview the night before, the stage grander, the stakes higher. Camille Johnson, the host said, the nation has heard your story, but the airline insists their version is true. How do you respond to claims that you were aggressive? Camille leaned into the microphone, her voice steady and clear. I wasn't aggressive. I was calm, I was professional, and I was humiliated. They're not just attacking me, they're attacking the truth. But here's the thing, truth always rises. And I won't be silent. The audience erupted in applause. By the time she left the studio, her phone buzzed with another flood of notifications. Messages of support poured in from strangers, celebrities, and even politicians. Camille felt the tide turning. But the airline wasn't backing down. Late that night, Anthony received a confidential email from a contact inside TransSky. It contained surveillance stills from the plane. Grainy black and white images showed Camille standing in the aisle with Kelly blocking her path. Another showed her seated in economy, staring forward, dignified. "Look at this," Anthony said, showing Camille the photos. "These don't back their story. If anything, they confirm yours." Camille studied them. "So why aren't they releasing them?" Anthony's lips curled. "Because they know it weakens their case. They'll bury it, unless we make it public." Camille hesitated. "Isn't that illegal?" Anthony shook his head. "Not if it was leaked to us. We're not stealing. We're exposing the truth." The next morning, the photos appeared online. A popular news site published them with the headline, "New Evidence Contradicts Airline's Story in Camille Johnson Case." The reaction was immediate. The public began demanding answers. Hashtags shifted again. Hashtag release the footage and hashtag Camille was right trended globally. TransSky scrambled. They released another statement, this time harsher, standing by Kelly's account and insisting Camille had misrepresented the facts. Anthony read it aloud at breakfast, his voice laced with contempt. "They're doubling down." Camille looked at him. "So what happens next?" Anthony set the paper aside. His eyes hardened. "Next, we stop playing defense. They've smeared your name, lied to the world, and tried to bury evidence. That was their choice. Now it's time to show them what happens when they underestimate the Johnsons." He picked up his phone again, scrolling through contacts. Camille didn't ask who he was calling. She only watched, her pulse quickening. She knew her husband's world was vast, filled with connections in law, finance, and politics. Whoever he was about to reach, she knew this much. The airline had just crossed into dangerous territory, and Anthony was about to make sure they regretted it. The Johnson townhouse buzzed like a command center. Phones rang, assistants rushed in and out, and screens lit up with news feed from every network in America. Camille sat at the head of the dining table, her laptop open, scanning headlines that painted her as both a victim and, in some corners, an aggressor. She could feel the weight of being at the center of a national storm. Anthony stood at the far end of the room, phone pressed to his ear, his tone razor-sharp. "I want every shareholder on the line within the hour. No excuses. If they own a piece of TransSky, I want them here or patched in." Camille glanced up. "Shareholders?" Anthony hung up and walked over, his steps measured and calm, but his eyes glowed with intensity. "Yes. The airline thinks this is just a PR battle. They don't realize the real war is fought in boardrooms. If they won't admit fault, we'll make their own people turn on them." Camille tilted her head. "You're calling their investors?" Anthony gave a faint smile. "Not calling. Summoning." Within 2 hours, a small group of sharply dressed men and women began filing into the townhouse. Some were hedge fund managers, others executives who controlled vast sums of money. These were people who normally sat across mahogany tables in skyscrapers, not in someone's living room. But when Anthony Johnson called, they came. He welcomed them with a nod. No small talk, no handshakes. "You've all seen the headlines," he began once they were seated. "Your airline has humiliated my wife, lied about it, and now the world is watching. You stand to lose billions if this continues." One of the shareholders, a silver-haired man with sharp glasses, cleared his throat. "Anthony, with respect, the airline is handling it. This will blow over." Anthony's gaze cut across the room like steel. "You think the public will forget? You think politicians won't seize this moment? Every passenger who's ever felt mistreated is speaking out. This isn't going away. And if you don't force TransSky to act, your stock will nosedive." The room went silent. Camille watched, fascinated. Anthony wasn't shouting, but his words hit with the weight of a gavel. Another shareholder, a woman in a red blazer, leaned forward. "What do you propose?" Anthony folded his hands. "It's simple. Fire the hostess. Fire the executives covering for her. Issue a full apology to my wife and to the public. Or," he paused, his eyes narrowing, "I will begin pulling my holdings and convincing every partner I have to do the same." The shareholders shifted uncomfortably. They knew what that meant. Anthony Johnson's portfolio wasn't just large, it was strategic. If he moved, others would follow. Camille spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm but firm. "This isn't just about me. It's about accountability. If you let them protect her, you're sending a message that this treatment is acceptable. Is that the kind of company you want to stand behind?" Her words hung in the air. Slowly, heads began to nod. By the time the meeting ended, the group had agreed to pressure the airline's leadership. Camille felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since that humiliating flight, she sensed the scales tilting. But TransSky wasn't ready to surrender. That evening, news broke of another statement, this one more aggressive. The CEO, David Burns, appeared on camera, his tie crooked, his face tight with strain. "We regret Ms. Johnson's experience," he said stiffly. "But we must clarify. Our employee acted within protocol. Safety is always our top priority, and disruptive behavior cannot be tolerated, regardless of a passenger's background or profession." Camille froze as the broadcast played. "Disruptive behavior?" she whispered. "They're doubling down again." Anthony muted the television. Good. The deeper they dig, the harder it will be when the ground collapses beneath them. He turned to Camille, his expression unreadable. "It's time to escalate." The next morning, Anthony arranged a press conference. It wasn't Camille alone this time. It was both of them, standing side by side before a wall of cameras. The crowd outside the hotel ballroom stretched down the block. Reporters shouted questions even before they reached the podium. Anthony spoke first. His voice was low, deliberate, and unshakable. "My wife was denied her rightful seat. She was humiliated and slandered. And now, this airline dares to suggest she was a threat? Let me be clear, this is not just about one woman, one flight, or one company. This is about accountability in an industry that has long ignored the voices of its passengers." The room buzzed. Flashes popped like fireworks. Then Camille stepped forward. She looked directly into the cameras. "I'm not afraid of their lies. I was calm. I was respectful. And still, I was treated as though I didn't belong. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. That's why I will not be silent." The applause from supporters in the back of the room drowned out the reporters' questions. Camille felt her voice grow steadier, stronger, like steel forged in fire. When they left the stage, Anthony's phone was already vibrating. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. "They're panicking. Their board is splitting. Some want to settle. Others want to fight. This is exactly what we wanted." But just as Camille started to exhale, another headline flashed across her phone. "Breaking. Airline hostess Kelly speaks out. I was just doing my job." A video clip showed Kelly sitting stiffly in front of a news anchor, tears welling in her eyes. "She scared me," Kelly said, her voice trembling. She was loud and confrontational. "I only followed procedure. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Camille's stomach dropped. She gripped Anthony's arm. "She's lying. She's twisting everything." Anthony watched silently, his face carved in stone. Then, slowly, he said, "Let her talk. The more she speaks, the more rope she gives herself. And when the truth finally crushes her story, it'll crush the airline with it." Camille shivered. She knew her husband well enough to recognize the look in his eyes. This wasn't just about defending her anymore. Anthony was preparing something bigger, something that would shake the entire airline to its core. And this time, she wouldn't stop him. The city buzzed with Kelly's interview. Clips of her teary-eyed defense played on every news channel. Some believed her, sympathizing with her fragile voice and trembling hands. Others tore her apart online, calling her performance fake, her story rehearsed. Camille sat on the couch in silence, her phone in her lap. She wasn't afraid of Kelly's lies, but she knew perception was powerful. And perception, when repeated enough, could become someone's truth. Anthony entered the room, adjusting his cufflinks, already dressed for the day. He stopped when he saw her expression. "Don't give her tears power," he said calmly. Camille lifted her eyes. People believe her. They want this simple story. Angry black woman lashes out. Poor hostess just doing her job. It's easier for them to swallow than the truth. Anthony sat beside her, his hand covering hers. "And that's exactly why we're not done yet. They've underestimated who they're fighting." Before Camille could respond, Anthony's phone buzzed. He answered, his tone sharp. "Talk." Camille watched his face harden as the voice on the other end spoke quickly. Then Anthony said, "Send it to me. Now." He hung up and tapped his phone. Seconds later, a video loaded on the screen. It was grainy, clearly from a passenger's cell phone. But the footage was unmistakable. There was Camille, standing quietly at the entrance to first class, calm and composed. Kelly blocked her way, her arms folded. The audio was muffled, but Kelly's words were clear enough. "This section is for first-class passengers only." The clip continued. Camille responded evenly, handing over her ticket. Kelly's face twisted as she shook her head. Then came the words that made Camille's blood boil all over again. "You'll be more comfortable in economy." The passengers' murmurs filled the background. Someone muttered, "That's messed up." The video cut off as Camille was guided away, her dignity intact, her silence louder than any scene could have been. Camille's hands trembled as she clutched the phone. This proves everything." Anthony's eyes gleamed. "Exactly. And once it's out, Kelly's tears will evaporate. She won't be the victim anymore. She'll be the liar." By noon, the video hit social media. Within minutes, it spread like wildfire. Hashtags changed again. Hashtag "We saw the video" and hashtag "Camille told the truth" trended worldwide. News anchors replayed the clip on loop. Commentators tore into the airline's narrative. Public outrage soared higher than before. At the townhouse, Camille's assistant Lila rushed in, breathless. The phones haven't stopped ringing. Journalists, civil rights groups, even senators want statements from you. Camille rubbed her temples. The noise was overwhelming, but she knew silence wasn't an option. Set up a press briefing for tonight. I'll speak directly. Anthony shook his head. Not you. Us. Together. That evening, cameras once again filled the hotel ballroom. But this time, the air felt different. Reporters weren't skeptical. They were hungry. Hungry for more truth, more drama, more fallout. Anthony stepped up first. His voice was calm, but carried like thunder. You've seen the video. You've heard the lies. The evidence is clear. My wife was denied her rightful seat and humiliated. And then, instead of owning their mistake, TransSky chose to smear her. This isn't just bad customer service. This is systemic failure. The room erupted with questions, but Anthony lifted a hand, silencing them. He motioned to Camille. She stepped forward, her posture straight, her voice firm. I didn't want this fight. I wanted to board my flight, sit in my seat, and get to my husband. But when I was told I didn't belong, when I was told to move back like I was less than others, that wasn't just about me. That was about every person who's been told they don't belong. And that's why I won't stay quiet. The room thundered with applause. Cameras flashed like lightning. But even as Camille spoke, Anthony's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. One word flashed from a trusted contact. Boardroom. Chaos. After the briefing, as they rode home in the black SUV, Anthony finally explained. The airline's leadership is fracturing. Some directors are demanding resignations. Others want to hold the line. But here's the key. Shareholders are losing patience. Their stock dropped 8% today. By tomorrow, it could be worse. Camille turned toward him, her pulse quickening. So what happens now? Anthony's lips curved faintly. Now we push them to the edge. One more shove and they fall. The following morning, Anthony convened another meeting, this time not at their townhouse, but at a private boardroom in Midtown. Around the table sat lawyers, PR strategists, and financial experts, all loyal to him. Camille listened as Anthony laid out his plan. We don't just respond to the airline, he said. We take control of the narrative completely. By the end of this week, either they beg for mercy or they don't exist. A lawyer raised a brow. That sounds like more than a lawsuit. Anthony's gaze was sharp. It is. This isn't about money. It's about accountability and power. They tried to humiliate my wife in public. Now we'll dismantle them in public. Camille felt a chill at his words. Not fear, but anticipation. She had seen Anthony negotiate billion-dollar deals, crush rivals with strategy, and build empires from the ground up. But this was different. This was personal. Later that night, Camille stood by the window of their bedroom, looking down at the glowing streets of Manhattan. Cars honked, people bustled, life went on. Yet she felt suspended in a different world, a world where every move she made rippled out into the nation. Anthony joined her, sliding an arm around her shoulders. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we make the move that ends this. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. And what if they still don't back down? Anthony's eyes darkened. Then we make sure they have nothing left to stand on. Camille shivered, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that the airline's fate was already sealed. Even if they didn't know it yet the next morning, the storm grew fiercer. News outlets replayed the leaked video on every channel, commentators dissecting every frame. Social media roared louder than ever, with people demanding justice. But inside TransSky headquarters, the atmosphere was anything but united. In a glass-walled conference room, the board of directors sat around a long, polished table. Tension hung so thick, it could be sliced with a knife. This has gone beyond a PR nightmare, one director barked. The stock is down 12%. Customers are canceling flights. We're bleeding money. Across the table, another director slammed a folder shut. And all because one hostess couldn't follow protocol. The CEO, a stiff man in his late 60s named Richard Hale, rubbed his temples. His once commanding voice cracked with exhaustion. We gave Kelly our support. Pulling back now makes us look weak. A younger woman director leaned forward sharply. Supporting her makes us look dishonest. The video is everywhere, Richard. People aren't stupid. They know what they saw. The room erupted in arguments, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Meanwhile, Anthony sat in his own private office in Midtown, his laptop open, a live feed of stock tickers running across the screen. He leaned back in his chair, calm, collected, a strategist in his element. Camille entered quietly, holding 2 coffees. She set one beside him and studied the screen. It's getting worse for them, she murmured. Anthony's lips curved faintly. Exactly as planned. She sank into the chair across from him. You make it sound like a chess game. He met her gaze. It is. And then walked straight into check. Just then his phone buzzed. He answered with a sharp talk. A voice on the other end reported in hurried tones. Anthony listened, nodding slightly. Good. Leak it. Full documents. Make sure the timestamp is clear. He ended the call and turned to Camille. "What was that?" she asked. Anthony slid a folder across the desk. Inside were internal emails from TransSky executives, dismissive comments about Camille's complaint, mocking references to her being overly sensitive, and most damning, instructions to Kelly on how to frame the narrative if questioned. Camille's eyes widened as she read. This is proof they tried to cover it up. Anthony nodded. By tonight, everyone will see it. And he was right. Hours later, the documents exploded across the internet. News anchors clutched the printed emails, reading them aloud with disgust. Make sure she feels it was just a misunderstanding. She's probably just looking for attention. If pressed, remind people we don't discriminate, but don't admit fault. The backlash was immediate and merciless. Hashtags like hashtag #TransSkyLies and hashtag emails don't lie trended within minutes. Passengers began recording videos, canceling their loyalty memberships. Influencers urged boycotts. Even rival airlines took subtle jabs online, capitalizing on the chaos. Inside TransSky's boardroom, Richard Hale slammed his fist against the table. "Who leaked those emails?" he shouted. But no one answered. The directors were too busy turning on each other, voices rising, tempers flaring. By evening, Camille and Anthony returned to the hotel ballroom for another press briefing. This time, the crowd of reporters stretched down the hall. The air vibrated with anticipation. Anthony took the podium, his presence commanding. "We didn't want to believe the airline would cover up their mistake. But the emails speak for themselves. They mocked my wife. They dismissed her pain. And then they lied to the public." Gasps rippled across the room as the documents flashed on screens behind him. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking nonstop. Then Camille stepped forward, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of emotion. This was never just about a seat on a plane. It was about dignity, about the right to be treated as equal, about not being judged by skin color before a single word is spoken. And when the truth was clear, they still tried to bury it. Applause erupted, louder than ever before. But Anthony wasn't finished. He leaned forward slightly, his tone icy. "This isn't just a scandal. This is a collapse in leadership. And I promise you, collapse has consequences." The room fell into a stunned hush. Reporters glanced at each other, sensing something bigger was coming, but no one knew what. That night, as Camille prepared for bed, she found herself pacing the suite. Her heart pounded, her mind racing. Anthony sat calmly on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. "You're restless," he said quietly. She turned sharply. "I keep wondering, what if they still don't break? What if they cling to their pride, no matter the cost?" Anthony finally looked up, his eyes cold with certainty. "Then we make sure they don't have a choice." She frowned. "What does that mean?" He stood, walked over, and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "It means by the time I'm done, TransSky won't just be fighting bad press. They'll be fighting for survival." The words sent a chill down her spine. She wasn't afraid of Anthony. She trusted him. But she knew he was capable of things others couldn't imagine. He had built empires. He had crushed competitors. And now, for the first time, his full force wasn't for business, it was for her. As she finally lay down beside him, unable to silence her racing thoughts, one truth settled deep inside her. This fight was far from over. And when the next move came, it wouldn't just shake the airline. It would shake the entire industry. The following morning, downtown Manhattan buzzed louder than usual. Screens outside stock exchanges blazed red arrows pointing downward. Financial reporters spoke breathlessly about the airline's collapse. "TransSky is losing millions by the hour," one anchor said on live television. "Investors are panicking. Customers are leaving in droves. The company's survival is now in question." Inside Anthony's office, the atmosphere was completely different. Calm, focused, strategic. His top advisors sat around a table while he stood at the head, a map of airline routes glowing on the screen behind him. "They've already lost control of their narrative," Anthony began, his tone steady. "Now we take away their stability." He pointed at the map. Red lines crossed over major hubs: Chicago, Atlanta, New York, Los Angeles. TransSky runs thin margins on these routes, he explained. "If we cut off suppliers, delay fuel contracts, and push regulators to inspect, they'll face operational chaos on top of their public collapse." One advisor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, frowned. That kind of move could push them into bankruptcy in weeks. Anthony's expression didn't change. "Exactly." Meanwhile, Camille sat in the corner, quietly observing. She hadn't expected her fight for dignity to turn into a battle that shook the airline industry. Yet, here she was, watching her husband maneuver like a general at war. "Anthony," she spoke softly, breaking the silence. "Are you sure you want to go this far?" He turned to her, his voice low but firm. "They mocked you, lied about you, dismissed you. This isn't just about punishing them. It's about sending a message no one will forget." She swallowed hard. A part of her wanted to tell him to slow down. Another part wanted to see justice pushed to the very edge. Later that day, in Washington, D.C., senators and regulators gathered for a closed-door meeting. The leaked emails had reached them too, and pressure from the public was impossible to ignore. "We can't stay out of this," Senator Blake said firmly. "If we let an airline operate like this, it sets a dangerous precedent." Another senator shook his head. "You're suggesting grounding flights? That's massive. It could cripple the economy." Blake leaned forward. "It's already crippling itself. And if we don't act, we look complicit." The room buzzed with arguments, tension building. Outside, journalists camped on the Capitol steps, desperate for any sign of federal action. At the same time, in TransSky's skyscraper headquarters, panic spread like wildfire. Richard Hale, the CEO, paced his office. His phone rang nonstop. Angry shareholders, nervous partners, furious politicians. On his desk lay the morning newspaper, its front page screaming in bold letters. Emails expose racism and lies. Can TransSky survive? Kelly, the hostess at the center of the storm, sat in a small waiting room down the hall. She looked pale, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Outside, employees whispered about her, some with pity, others with resentment. Richard finally summoned her in. When she stepped inside, he didn't look up from his desk. "Do you realize what you've done?" he muttered coldly. Kelly stammered. I didn't mean." He slammed his hand on the table. "You didn't mean? You humiliated a paying passenger. You humiliated a CEO, and now the entire company is paying the price." Tears welled in Kelly's eyes, but Richard's face hardened. "For now, you're suspended. Indefinitely. Pray, that's the worst of it." As she left the office, trembling, whispers grew louder. Some employees turned away, unwilling to meet her eyes. Others stared openly, as if she were the sole cause of their sinking ship. That evening, Camille and Anthony were invited to a live primetime interview. The studio lights glared down, cameras zoomed in, millions of viewers watching across the country. The host leaned forward, her tone sharp. "Camille, you were denied your seat. You were mocked. You were dismissed. But now, this has turned into something far bigger. Some are saying your husband is orchestrating the downfall of an entire airline. Do you feel responsible?" Camille inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "I feel determined. This isn't about bringing down a company for the sake of power. It's about accountability, about the truth. If TransSky had admitted they're wrong, treated me like a human being, and fixed their mistake, we wouldn't be here. But they didn't. They lied. They mocked me. And when you lie and mock people in power, consequences follow." The studio fell into a tense silence. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Anthony finally spoke, his voice even colder than before. "The airline's future isn't in our hands anymore. It's in theirs. They chose arrogance. They chose deceit. And every choice has a cost." By the time the interview ended, hashtags once again dominated the internet. Clips of Camille's firm words and Anthony's chilling tone spread across TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter within minutes. Back at TransSky headquarters, Richard Hale watched the interview replay on a screen in his office. His hands trembled, his face pale. He whispered to himself, "We're finished." That night, Camille lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. "Anthony," she murmured, "what happens if TransSky falls completely? Thousands of employees will lose their jobs." Anthony, lying beside her, didn't open his eyes. Sometimes, when a tree rots from the inside, it has to fall. Only then can something better grow. His words were calm, but the weight of them sent a chill down her spine. She realized then that the next move would not just shake TransSky. It would decide whether the company lived or died. And Anthony had already decided which way it would go. The morning began with chaos. News helicopters circled above TransSky's New York headquarters as protesters crowded the street below. Signs lifted high into the air read, "No more racism in the skies. Accountability now. Justice for Camille." The chants rose like thunder, echoing off the glass towers. Inside, the board of directors sat around a long mahogany table. Their faces were pale, their suits rumpled, their nerves on edge. Richard Hale, the CEO, stood at the head, but his voice was hoarse, his authority visibly crumbling. "We have to fight this," he insisted. "We can survive if we spin the narrative, say we've changed policies, release an apology video, offer discounts." One board member slammed his hand against the table. "Are you blind? We're bleeding money. Flights are grounded. Our stock is tanking. And every time your name appears in the media, it's tied to scandal. We're finished." Richard's mouth opened, but no words came. He slumped back into his chair, the weight of defeat pressing down on him. Across town, Anthony watched the scene unfold on 3 large monitors in his office. He had live feeds, news channels, financial updates, even insider leaks. His team had done their job well. "Sir," one advisor said, handing him a tablet, "the Department of Transportation just ordered an emergency investigation into TransSky's safety and compliance. This is the final blow." Anthony nodded slowly, his eyes cold. "Then it's over." At that moment, Camille entered the room. She wore a simple white dress, her expression calm but unreadable. "It's done, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Anthony turned to her. "Yes. In less than an hour, TransSky will be grounded nationwide. She walked closer, her voice trembling. Do you realize what that means? An entire airline collapsing because of one choice? Because a woman thought I didn't belong in first class. Anthony looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, this was never about one woman. This was about a system that allowed her arrogance, a company that encouraged her prejudice, and a world that thought they could humiliate you without consequence. Camille closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight of his words sink in. Meanwhile, in airports across the country, chaos erupted. Passengers stood in lines that stretched for miles as gate screens flickered from on time to canceled. Airline workers frantically tried to calm furious travelers, but panic spread fast. At JFK International, one businessman shouted at the counter staff, I've got a meeting in London. What do you mean the flight is canceled? At LAX, a family with 3 children cried as they were told they'd have to rebook with another airline, possibly weeks away. News crews captured it all, broadcasting live to millions. TransSky shut down, leaves thousands stranded. Back at TransSky headquarters, Richard Hale received the final call from Washington. His hands shook as he answered. This is Director Collins with the Department of Transportation, the stern voice said. Effective immediately, TransSky Airlines is grounded pending investigation. All flights must be canceled. Richard's heart pounded in his ears. This will destroy us, he whispered. That's not my concern. The voice replied before hanging up. Richard dropped the phone. Around him, board members stood silently, some shaking their heads, others gathering their belongings. One by one, they walked out, leaving him alone in the massive room. The empire he had built was collapsing in real time. At the same moment, Anthony and Camille stood side by side in front of the windows of their penthouse apartment, looking down at the city. Helicopters buzzed, sirens wailed, and giant news tickers flashed the headline. TransSky Airlines grounded. Future uncertain. Camille whispered, I never asked for this. Anthony placed a steady hand on her shoulder. No, but you deserved respect. And now, no airline in this country will dare disrespect you again. Her throat tightened. She thought of the thousands of employees now facing unemployment, of the families stranded at airports. A deep part of her wrestled with guilt. Yet another part, the part that remembered the sting of humiliation on that plane, felt a sense of justice. Later that night, they were invited once more to a live national broadcast. This time, the host didn't mince words. Anthony, Camille, she began, today an airline shut down. A giant of the industry has fallen. People are calling this one of the fastest corporate collapses in American history. Do you feel you've gone too far? The studio was silent. The audience leaned forward. Camille spoke first, her voice steady, her eyes unwavering. I didn't shut down the airline. My husband didn't shut it down. They shut themselves down when they chose lies over truth, arrogance over humility, and racism over respect. We only pulled the curtain back for the world to see. The host swallowed hard, turning to Anthony. And you, sir? Do you feel satisfied with this outcome? Anthony leaned forward, his words cutting through the silence. Satisfied? No, this isn't satisfaction. This is a warning. To every corporation, every leader, every person in power, your actions matter. How you treat people matters. If you abuse your position, if you think you can humiliate someone without consequence, one day, someone like me will remind you otherwise. The room was heavy with silence. Viewers at home sat frozen, chills running down their spines. By the next morning, the airline's bankruptcy filing was official. Employees cried outside the headquarters, reporters swarmed, and the once mighty TransSky name was now synonymous with disgrace. But in the heart of New York, in a quiet apartment overlooking the chaos, Camille sat alone by the window, sipping her coffee. She felt both heavy and light, haunted by the destruction, yet proud of the stand she had taken. Her phone buzzed with messages, allies praising her courage, strangers thanking her for exposing truth, critics blaming her for the downfall. She read them all in silence. When Anthony walked in, he placed his hands on her shoulders. History will remember this, he said softly. She turned to him, her voice almost a whisper. I don't want to be remembered for breaking something. I want to be remembered for showing what dignity is worth. Anthony nodded. Then that's exactly how they'll remember you. And with that, the story of one denied seat, one moment of arrogance, 1 hour of power, became the story that shook an entire nation. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, in order to strengthen our community, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.